The wind carried the faint smell of damp earth and rust as dusk settled over the edge of the city. A thin, dust-coated puppy padded along the cracked pavement, its ribs sharp beneath a coat of wiry fur. The animal moved with a strange purpose, neither scavenging for food nor shrinking from the scattered sounds of traffic. Instead, its nose stayed fixed to the ground, following some scent only it seemed to know. When a pair of officers noticed it at the mouth of an abandoned service road, they thought little of it at first. Strays were common here, weaving between the ruins of factories and half-collapsed storage sheds. But this dog wasn't aimless. It kept glancing back, almost as if it wanted them to follow. Officer Marquez, who had patrolled this district for years, slowed his step. He was a man in his 50s, shoulders heavy from the weight of decades in uniform. His partner, Officer Lian, younger but more tightly wound, muttered about paperwork waiting back at the station. Yet both found themselves standing still, caught by the animal's behavior. The puppy had stopped near a concrete embankment where weeds spilled down in tangled mats. Without hesitation, it slipped through a jagged gap in the retaining wall, tail low, ears alert. The sound that followed was not what they expected. A faint echo drifted back out like water dripping in some hidden cavern, hollow and deep. Marquez frowned. He had walked this block hundreds of times, yet he had never noticed an opening there. The dog's small body vanished into the dark, leaving only a scrape of claws against stone. Lian raised his flashlight but hesitated to shine it inside. Something about the air seeping out was wrong, cool, metallic, touched by a long-stale dampness that did not belong to the surface world. Marquez knelt, peering closer. The narrow gap led into what looked like a collapsed storm tunnel, its interior, walls streaked with soot and roots clawing through the cracks. The ground bore signs of disturbance, prints too faint to name, but layered and old, pressed into the silt. He felt the odd weight of memory stirring, as though the place had been waiting for someone to return. He called softly for the dog, but the sound vanished without answer, swallowed by the tunnel's throat. The younger officer shifted uneasily. He spoke in a low voice, suggesting they mark the spot and call it in. Let others handle it. Marquez didn't respond right away. His gaze stayed fixed on the darkness, where the dog's faint whimper now echoed somewhere deep inside. He thought of all the years of unanswered cases, names once pinned to station corkboards, photographs now curling with age, 15 years of searching, of stories never concluded. And here, in the half-light, a stray puppy had walked straight into the silence that might hold them. The city hummed faintly behind them, but at the tunnel's mouth the world felt still, as if holding breath. Lian finally swung the flashlight beam into the gap. The light caught something pale in a distant stone, perhaps, or the curve of an object lodged against the wall. For a moment it seemed to shimmer, as though moisture had preserved it from time. Then the beam faltered, shadows closing back over it. Marquez straightened slowly, his face unreadable. The puppy barked once, the sound muffled but sharp, a call that was not playful but urgent. Both officers exchanged a glance that held more than words: hesitation, unease, and the pull of something they couldn't yet name. Behind them, the last streak of daylight bled out over the rooftops, leaving the gap in the wall darker still. Whatever lay inside had been hidden long enough to gather dust, roots, and silence. And now, guided by a creature that should have been chasing scraps, they stood on the threshold of it. The tunnel waited, breathing its faint metallic breath, daring them to step forward. The flashlight beam caught on dust motes that drifted like pale insects, suspended in the cool air. Officer Marquez stepped closer to the gap, his breath shallow. He lowered himself onto one knee, shoulders pressed tight against the damp stone, and reached a hand to steady himself on the wall. The surface crumbled beneath his touch, flaking into fine grit that smelled faintly of rust. Somewhere inside, the puppy gave another sharp bark, followed by the quick patter of claws slipping on wet stone. The sound pulled them both inward like a rope. Marquez eased himself through the gap first, his frame scraping against the broken edges. He moved slow, boots testing the ground before committing his weight. The beam of light trembled with each step, illuminating streaks of black mold, climbing the walls like veins. Behind him, Officer Lian followed, the tunnel swallowing his muttered breath. The air thickened quickly, heavy with moisture, carrying the faint undertone of stagnant water and something older, an odor that made the back of the throat ache. The tunnel widened into a chamber, its ceiling arched and ribbed with corroded steel supports. Roots dangled from above, dripping with cold droplets that spattered onto their uniforms. The dog's silhouette flickered ahead, pausing to glance back before vanishing again into the shadows. It moved with unnerving certainty, as if retracing steps it could not have taken before. Marquez found himself slowing to match its rhythm, drawn forward by a quiet insistence that resisted logic. The beam fell across the ground, revealing fragments. A rusted pipe gnawed open, a child's shoe half buried in silt, the collapsed bones of a rat washed against the wall. Lian froze, his hand tightening on Marquez's shoulder, urging him to stop. But the puppy's whimper echoed again, softer now, strained, as though it had found something that silenced its playful energy. That change in tone unsettled them, more than the relics underfoot. As they drew deeper, A low hum began to rise, faint at first, then clearer, the echo of running water. It wasn't near, but it suggested a current still flowing beneath the city, a forgotten artery no map had marked. The air turned colder, sharper. Marquez's light caught on a shape at the edge of the chamber, narrow opening, half blocked by collapsed masonry. The puppy crouched at its base, pawing the earth, nose pressed hard into the cracks. Marquez crouched beside it, his knees grinding against the damp floor. The puppy shifted back, eyes gleaming in the beam, not fearful but insistent. Its ribs moved with quick, shallow breaths, and mud streaked its fur where it had scraped the ground raw. Without thinking, Marquez brushed the loose rubble aside with his hand, stone dust clinging to his skin. The gap widened just enough for the light to catch something beyond, a tangle of cloth, pale and preserved against the damp, snagged around a shape that did not move. The moment stretched long, sound narrowing to the drip of water from the ceiling and the faint rattle of Lian's breath behind him. The cloth was not new. Its folds carried stains blurred by time, its edges frayed and sunk into the silt. For 15 years, the city above had gone on living while this hidden hollow guarded silence. The puppy pressed closer, paw scraping Marquez's wrist as though demanding he see what lay just beyond. Marquez pulled back, his face shadowed by the beam's edge. His posture stiffened, not from fear alone, but from recognition of something unfinished. He glanced at Lian, whose expression flickered between disbelief and dread. No words passed, only the weight of shared awareness. They had stumbled into the mouth of something that was not lost, only waiting. The chamber seemed to contract around them, roots swaying gently as if stirred by breath. The puppy sat, tail curled tight, its gaze fixed on the gap. It did not whine now, it only waited, as if it had done its part. Outside, faint thunder rolled. Across the city, its echo muffled by layers of stone. Marquez placed his palm against the rubble again, pushing aside another shard. The sound of stone grinding against stone reverberated through the chamber like a warning. Behind him, Lian shifted, one foot scraping the floor as though preparing to retreat. Neither moved further, caught between advancing and withdrawing. Their silence threaded with the knowledge that whichever choice they made would close the other path forever. The flashlight beam trembled once more, steadying on the frayed cloth, and the darkness it shielded. The puppy gave a short, breathless huff, its body tense as if sensing the decision hanging in the stale air. The tunnel stretched downward in a jagged slope, the beam of Lian's flashlight trembling over slick stone, and roots that jutted like broken ribs. The puppy had gone quiet now, but every few steps its claws scraped faintly in the dark, a sound that both guided and unsettled the officers. Moisture clung to the air, metallic and cold, carrying with it the faint temth of rust. The deeper they moved, the more the outside world vanished, its hum of traffic and scattered birds, replaced by dripping water and the muffled press of earth. Lian slowed when the ground grew uneven. A rusted length of pipe jutted from the wall, its edges sharp, and in trying to steady himself he tore his sleeve open. A shallow gash marked his arm, but he pressed it shut without a word. The cut wasn't severe, but it bled steadily, the smell, sharp in the stale air. Marquez noticed, his eyes narrowing, yet he said nothing. Instead, he studied the way the puppy lingered just ahead. Tail low, ears forward, as if torn between fear and insistence. The light finally struck something unexpected, a faint trail of markings along the wall, uneven and half consumed by moss. They weren't fresh, but they weren't natural either, lines scratched in haste or desperation. Lian stopped, his breathing heavy as if the tunnel itself had pressed closer around them. The dog sniffed at the markings, then whined, backing up slightly before moving forward again. It seemed to know that the scratches mattered, but not how. A shift came with the drip of water from the ceiling. The droplets struck the stone floor in a regular rhythm, sounding like distant footsteps echoing ahead. Each splash blurred into the silence, but it was enough to make Marquez pause. He lifted his hand, stilling Lian. For a moment they both listened, caught between the imagined and the real. Then the puppy barked once, short and sharp, breaking the spell and pulling them forward. The tunnel widened suddenly into a chamber, the ceiling higher, the air thicker. The flashlight beam caught fragments of objects scattered in the silt: a snapped boot sole, a rusted belt buckle, cloth long since rotted into colorless tatters. These things spoke not of chance litter but of lives once paused and never resumed. Marquez crouched, brushing a fragment with the back of his hand, and the weight of years seemed to fall heavier on his shoulders. Lian turned away, his arm still bleeding, his face pale beneath the beam. The puppy didn't linger near the fragments. Instead, it circled to the far wall, where water had carved a narrow runnel through the silt, there half buried beneath roots and stone. Something pale caught the light again, not cloth this time, but bone, smoothed by dampness and years. The dog pawed at it once before stepping back, ears pressed flat. Neither officer spoke. The sound of dripping water filled the silence, punctuated by the faint scuffle of the dog's retreat toward the center of the chamber. Marquez felt the chill of the air settle into his bones. The markings on the wall, the forgotten objects, and now this 15 years of absence taking physical shape before them. He exhaled slowly, as if releasing a truth he had carried too long. Then something shifted. The light swept further, glinting on metal beyond the boner badge, dulled but still legible, pressed into the mud. Not one of theirs, not from their station, but unmistakably official. Lian bent closer despite the sting in his arm, brushing it clean with the edge of his sleeve. The insignia was older, its style phased out long ago, yet still sharp enough to recognize. The years of silence began to rearrange themselves in that instant, the past stepping into the present with quiet force. The puppy wind again, circling back toward them, pressing against Marquez's knee as though seeking reassurance, or urging him on. Its small body trembled, not with cold but with something heavier, as if the weight of what it had led them to was pressing down even on its instincts. Marquez reached for the animal briefly, his hand settling on its thin back. The gesture was wordless, but it steadied both of them. Lian straightened, his flashlight beam wavering slightly. He looked deeper into the chamber, where the silt thickened and the air smelled of earth long undisturbed. There was more shapes that the light only half revealed, contours that hinted at what else might be buried. Neither man moved closer, though the dog's eyes followed the dark intently, as if expecting something to emerge. The dripping slowed to a faint trickle, the silence afterward sharper than before. In that stillness, Marquez felt a shift. What they thought they were following was no longer just a stray leading them on a whim. The dog had led them to a story older than itself, older than the tunnel's collapse. And now they stood not at the end of it, but at its threshold. The chamber seemed to wait for their next step, its silence no longer empty but charged, the kind that comes before a truth too long hidden breaks the surface. The flashlight beam trembled as Lian adjusted his grip, its cone of light pushing only a few yards into the tunnel before the dark pressed back like something solid. The puppy was no longer barking only. The faint shuffle of claws could be heard ahead, sometimes close, sometimes farther, as if the sound itself was twisting in the stone. Marquez stepped forward, the leather of his boots scraping the grit, and the younger officer caught himself leaning back instead of following. The air was colder now, carrying a bitterness that made the throat sting, as though rust had seeped into it. A sudden shift underfoot snapped their focus. The soil near the entrance gave way slightly, sagging into a dip where the wall had once collapsed. Marquez froze, then slowly lowered his hand. The flashlight revealed something unexpected, a coil of wire tangled in the rubble, threaded with old roots. It wasn't storm debris, not entirely. Human work had once marked this place. Reinforcements cut through the stone, bolts corroded but still clinging. This was not a simple drainage passage. Deeper in, the puppy wind again, sharp and impatient. The sound struck Marquez differently this time. It wasn't pleading, it was beckoning. He ducked under the arch of broken cement and stepped inside, letting the beam sweep along walls lined with graffiti bleached to ghosts of letters. The ground sloped gently, water trickling in rivulets that caught the light like broken glass. Lian followed at last, his body taut, movements clipped. When the beam touched his face, it showed a fine sheen of sweat despite the chill. His unease wasn't only the darkness, it was the awareness that they were now beneath the surface, cut off from the city's hum. The puppy's small form darted into sight for a second, tail brushing against a wall before vanishing again, deeper into the curving passage. The tunnel widened unexpectedly after a turn, opening into a chamber where the ceiling arched higher, thick with roots that dangled like ropes. Water pooled in the center, fed by a thin stream dripping steadily through a crack. Marquez's light swept across the surface and landed on something that stopped him cold. An old shoe lay half submerged at the edge, its leather split laces hardened to a stiff twist. Not New Year's gone, the kind of thing that should have rotted to nothing but hadn't. The puppy padded over to it, sniffing, then turned in a circle before sitting, its ears pricked toward the dark corridor beyond. Marquez crouched, the weight in his chest heavy, but he didn't touch the shoe. Instead, he let the silence hold, broken only by the drip of water and the faint shuffle of paws. Then came a sound neither had expected, not the dog, not water, but something dragging faintly against stone, far beyond the reach of the light. Both men stilled, instinct tightening their muscles. It wasn't heavy, no crash or roll, but steady, deliberate, as though something moved with care to remain unnoticed. Lian swung the beam toward the sound, but the darkness seemed to bend and absorb it. The puppy stood, hackles raised, its thin body taut, no longer a guide but a sentinel. Marquez's breath slowed. He felt the years press on him, the memory of a missing boy whose case had haunted the precinct, of parents who had grown old, waiting, 15 years without a trace. The tunnel was no ruin of the present, it was the keeper of what had been buried too long. And now, with each step, the possibility of finding answers was less distant. The dragging sound ceased. Silence gathered, again, heavier than before. But the beam of light caught a detail near the far wall, faint scratches etched into the stone, overlapping in chaotic layers, not recent, but not ancient either. Marks made by hands, not claws. Lian muttered something, under his breath, too quiet to catch, and shifted his stance. Marquez didn't answer. He raised the flashlight higher, and in doing so revealed something else, letters carved deep into the stone, worn by damp but still legible enough to stir recognition. It was not a name they had expected. The puppy barked once, a sharp break in the silence, then bounded toward the far corridor again, paws splashing through the water. Marquez's hand tightened on the flashlight, his other brushing against the wall as if steadying himself on history. Leanne hesitated at the chamber's edge, but the decision had already been made. What had begun as a stray's erratic path through the streets had now brought them to a place where the line between past and present had thinned, where something long hidden breathed just ahead, and in the stillness that followed, the air seemed to shift, as if the tunnel itself was waiting for them to decide whether to continue or turn back before the truth unraveled further. The tunnel narrowed again after the chamber, its walls pressing closer, the air thick with damp. Marquez led with a flashlight, the beam sweeping across more scratches, more faint carvings, until the path broke into a second cavity. Here the ground sloped unevenly, and at the far edge a mound of collapsed stone blocked what had once been a passage. The puppy stopped before it, pawing at the dirt, then sitting back on its haunches as though waiting. Marquez drew closer, his breath steady but heavy, while Leanne lingered near the water's edge, torn between retreat and duty. The light caught on something in the rubble. Not bone, not the relic of some predator, but fabric threadbare and darkened with time, yet unmistakably human. Beside it, the curve of a rusted buckle, the kind once fixed to a backpack strap. Marquez crouched slowly, his knees stiff with the years, and let the silence fold around him. He didn't reach out to disturb it. The earth had claimed what it would. The truth lay here, worn down to its simplest form. Not mystery, not menace. Only the quiet record of someone who had walked into the dark and never returned. The younger officer finally stepped forward, his eyes fixed not on the remnants but on Marquez himself. The silence between them carried more than words, could an acknowledgement of what had ended and of the long span of waiting that would end with it. Didn't speak of the families, of the endless questions. They simply stood in the still air of the tunnel, bearing witness. The puppy nosed the fabric once more, then turned its head, ears flicking toward the exit, as if urging them not to linger longer than needed. Marquez rose slowly. He felt no triumph, no relief sharp enough to cut through the weight of years. What filled him instead was something quieter. The recognition that the search was never meant to uncover victory, only truth. The dog, thin and nameless, had led them here not out of miracle but instinct, a pull toward the forgotten. Its work was already complete. They walked back through the chamber in silence, water still dripping steadily into the pool. The scratches along the walls seemed different now, not warnings, not riddles, but fragments of human presence left behind in desperation. Each mark carried the weight of someone trying to hold on. At the tunnel's mouth, the night had settled. Over the city, the puppy slipped ahead of them, tail low but steady, padding back into the weeds. The officers emerged into the open air, blinking against the faint glow of streetlights in the distance. The world outside had continued unchanged, unaware of what lay below its surface. The dog lingered a moment longer, looking back once before trotting off into the dim alleys beyond. It did not seek thanks, nor did it wait to be taken in. Its role had ended where the truth was found. Marquez watched it go, the shape small against the sprawl of broken concrete and scattered grass, until it vanished entirely. For a long moment, the two men stood at the edge of the tunnel. The night air smelled faintly of dust and wildflowers, pressed flat by passing tires. Above them, clouds shifted, allowing a pale scatter of stars to break through. Marquez exhaled, his shoulders lowering, not in release but in recognition. Some endings arrived not with revelation, but with the quiet dignity of being found at last. The wind rose briefly, sweeping down the empty road and through the weeds, lifting grit and leaves across the surface before settling again. Where the puppy's paws had pressed into the dirt, faint tracks remained, leading away into the dark, already softening under the night breeze.